Welcome to This is V-So-W.
It is fantastic to be here.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into a topic that is, frankly, massive. It's the kind of topic that feels like it requires a map, a compass, and maybe a stiff drink to really navigate properly.
That's putting it lightly.
We're looking at the evolution of Black identity in America, but, not the standard textbook version. We aren't just talking about voting rights or bus boycotts.
Important as those are.
Incredibly important. But today we're looking at the radical, the multi-layered, and let's be honest, the often controversial reimaginings of what it means to be Black. We're talking nationalism, cosmology, and, the rewriting of history itself.
This is definitely one of the densest stacks of research we have ever tackled. And you're right, the standard version of history often leaves out the psychological and spiritual dimensions of this struggle.
Why?
We tend to focus on laws and policies. But today, we're looking at the internal revolution. We're tracing a specific arc, how a marginalized group African Americans essentially redefine themselves from the inside out, often in direct opposition to the world around them.
And the sources we've pulled for this, it is an eclectic mix. We have seminal essays from the Harlem Renaissance, specifically Alain Locke, who is just a heavyweight.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got encyclopedic breakdowns of the Black Power movement. We have sociological studies on religious sects like the Nation of Islam and the Black Hebrew Israelites. And then we have some really intense academic debates regarding Afrocentrism and Egyptology. It's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum, and I think we need to set the table here. Our mission today is not to validate every single historical claim we come across. Some of the things we are going to discuss are considered edgy or fringe or, pseudoscientific by mainstream standards.
That's for sure.
We're going to talk about radical reinterpretations of the Bible, claims about biological superiority, and alternate histories of civilization.
We're going to be talking about everything from the sophisticated philosophy of the New Negro in the 1920s to the belief that white people were created by a mad scientist named Yaqub on the island of Patmos.
Precisely. And the goal isn't to say this is true or this is false. The goal is to understand the logic within these movements. Why did they emerge? What psychological hole were they filling?
That's the key question, isn't it?
It is. When you've been stripped of your history and your dignity, how do you build it back? Sometimes you build it back with bricks that the mainstream world views as well. Unconventional.
So, to you listening right now, this deep dive is designed to take you past the headlines and the slogans you might see on Twitter or in a documentary. We want to get under the hood.
Exactly.
We want to understand the intellectual and the spiritual machinery that drives these movements. Because whether you agree with them or not, they have shaped the cultural landscape we live in.
Absolutely. And to understand where we're going to the spaceships and the armed revolutionaries, we have to start at the foundation. We have to go back to 1925.
The psychological shift.
The psychological shift. This is the era of the Harlem Renaissance. And the central figure here is a philosopher, a Rhodes Scholar, and a writer named Alain Locke. He publishes this landmark anthology and essay titled Enter the New Negro.
I read this essay in the prep for this, and the language is it's striking, it's elegant, but it is also cutting. He sets up this dichotomy between the old Negro and the new Negro. But it wasn't just a generational thing, was it? It felt deeper.
Oh, it was much, much deeper. Locke argues that the old Negro was essentially a myth. He wasn't a human being. He was a concept.
A concept. How so?
He was a creature of moral debate. That's the phrase he uses. For generations, America and even, Black Americans themselves had viewed the Black man as a problem to be solved. He was a formula.
Right. A thing.
A thing. He was something to be kept down in the South or helped up in the North, but he was always the object of someone else's action.
That is a brutal realization. To realize that your entire identity has been defined by what is being done to you rather than who you are.
Exactly. And Locke points out the tragedy of it, that Black people had internalized this. He calls it protective social mimicry.
Protective social mimicry.
You act the way the white world expects you to act, subservient, simple, grateful, because it's safe. It is a survival mechanism. But the cost of that survival is your own soul. You become a caricature.
But then, 1925, Locke looks around and says, something has changed. He describes a metamorphosis.
He uses this beautiful metaphor of shedding a chrysalis. He writes, by shedding the old chrysalis of the Negro problem, we are achieving something like a spiritual emancipation.
Wow. I love that phrasing.
It's incredible, isn't it? He's admitting that the political problem wasn't solved. Jim Crow was still very much alive, but the vital inner grip of prejudice had been broken. The psychology of inferiority was gone.
It's the difference between asking for charity and demanding respect.
That's it.
The new Negro wasn't begging to be treated well. He was expressing himself because he had something to say.
And we have to look at the catalyst for this. Why did it happen then? It wasn't magic. It was the Great Migration. You cannot overstate the impact of millions of people picking up and leaving the feudal South for the industrial North and Midwest.
It changes the geography of the problem.
It makes it a national issue, not just a Southern one. But more importantly, it creates critical mass. Locke talks about how in the South, Black people were scattered, but in the North, they converged, and specifically, they converged on Harlem.
Harlem is Mecca.
Harlem is Zion. Locke is very specific about this. He says, the pulse of the Negro world has begun to beat in Harlem. It wasn't just a neighborhood. It was the first time in American history where you had a concentration of Black intellectuals, artists, poets, and workers who were creating culture for each other.
That's the key, isn't it? The audience changed.
The gaze changed. They stopped looking at white people to see if they were approved and started looking at each other. You see the explosion of jazz, of the spirituals. Yeah. Locke argues that for the old Negro, folk music was a source of shame. It was a reminder of slavery and lack of education. But for the new Negro, jazz and the spirituals were high art. They were distinct cultural contributions that America couldn't ignore.
It's reclaiming the narrative. I am not a problem, I am a creator.
I am a collaborator in the American experiment. That was Locke's hope. He thought that through culture, through showing the world how beautiful Black art was, political equality would follow. He thought art would be the bridge.
But, and here's the tragic pivot, art wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough.
The poetry was beautiful, the jazz was infectious, but the laws didn't change fast enough. The violence didn't stop. And as we move from the 20s into the mid-century, that psychological self-respect starts to harden.
It does. It starts to calcify.
It stops being just about art and starts being about power. Which brings us to the rise of Black nationalism.
Right. And this is a term that gets thrown around a lot, often as a scare word, but we need to, define it clinically.
So let's unpack it. What is the actual definition of Black nationalism compared to, say, the Civil Rights Movement?
Think of it this way. The Civil Rights Movement, led by King and others, was fundamentally integrationist. The goal was to get a seat at the table. The metaphor is, we want to move into the main house and be treated like family.
Okay.
Black nationalism says, the main house is toxic, the foundation is rotten, we need to build our own house.
Agency over inclusion.
Exactly. Black nationalism is the belief that Black people constitute a distinct nation, a people within a people, and therefore require self-determination. That means controlling their own economy, their own politics, their own communities.
And this often overlaps with separatism, right?
It does. Separatism is the more extreme practical application. It is the belief that integration is physically or spiritually impossible, so the only solution is physical separation.
A separate state.
Or leaving altogether. It could mean a separate state within the U.S., or it could mean leaving the country entirely. And historically, this is not new. In our stack, we see this goes way back before the 1960s.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's ancient. Historians usually break it down into 3 periods. First, you have the pre-revolutionary period, the Maroon communities. These fascinate me.
I've heard about these.
Enslaved people who escaped but didn't go north. They went into the swamps of Florida or the mountains of Jamaica. They built independent, armed societies while slavery was still the law of the land. That is the ultimate separatism.
We are just going to opt out of your society entirely and live in the swamp.
And defend it with force. Then in the 19th century, you have the emigration movements. Men like Paul Cuff and Martin Delany. They looked at the U.S. after the revolution and said, this country was built on our backs, but it wasn't built for us.
A sentiment that's still around today.
Very much so. They advocated moving to Haiti or back to Africa, but the figure who really sets the stage for the modern era, the man whose shadow looms over everything we're about to discuss, is Marcus Garvey.
Marcus Garvey. You cannot understand 20th century Black identity without him.
Not at all. He was a Jamaican immigrant who came to the U.S. and founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. And in the 1920s, he built the largest mass movement of Black people in history.
What was his pitch? What was the appeal?
His pitch was dignity through power. He didn't talk about integration. He talked about a back-to-Africa consciousness. He preached that Black is strong, Black is capable, and Black people should have their own shipping lines, their own factories, their own government.
The Black Star Line.
The Black Star Line. He held these massive parades in Harlem where men would dress in military uniforms, the African Legion.
It was pageantry, but it was serious.
It was nation-building and waiting. He gave people titles: High Chancellor, Lady of the Royal Court. Critics mocked him, called him a buffoon, but for a factory worker who was treated like dirt all day, Garvey offered a vision where he was a king.
He gave them an identity outside of what America gave them.
He did. Garveyism planted the seed that God was Black, that Africa was the motherland, and that economic independence was the only way to freedom.
Even though the U.S. government targeted him, J. Edgar Hoover was obsessed with deporting him, and the movement eventually fractured, the idea didn't die.
The idea never died. The Nation of Islam, the Rastafari movement, the Black Power movement of the 60s, they are all the children of Garvey. He proved that you could mobilize millions of people around the idea of Black pride without asking for white permission.
So let's jump to the 1960s. The civil rights movement is struggling, King is assassinated, and the frustration just boils over. Garvey's seeds start to bloom into two distinct branches of nationalism. The sources label them revolutionary nationalism and cultural nationalism.
This is a critical distinction. On one side, you have the revolutionary nationalists. The poster children here are, of course, the Black Panther Party for self-defense.
Leather jackets, berets, shotguns.
The aesthetic was iconic, but the ideology was Marxist. They were scientific socialists. They believed that racism was a byproduct of capitalism.
So it was a class issue as much as a race issue for them.
Exactly. So, to free Black people, you had to overthrow the entire capitalist system. They weren't just about race, they were about class. They wanted to unite with poor whites, Latinos, anyone oppressed, to fight the American empire.
All power to the people.
Exactly. And they were practical. They ran breakfast programs for kids, health clinics, but they also patrolled the police. It was a political, tangible revolution.
Then you have the other side of the coin. Cultural nationalism.
This is represented by figures like Maulana Karenga, the creator of Kwanzaa, or the poet Amiri Baraka. Their argument was, we can't have a political revolution yet because our minds are still enslaved.
What does that mean exactly?
They believed that Black people had been deculturalized by slavery, stripped of their values, their names, their history. So the priority was reconstruction.
Rebuilding a culture before you can build a nation.
Yes. They argued you needed to reclaim African names, wear African clothes like dashikis and juzzles, and practice African rituals. You had to re-Africanize the Black American before you could liberate him.
It sounds appealing, reconnecting with roots. But reading the critique in our sources, this wasn't exactly a utopia of equality, especially for women.
No, and this is where we have to be honest about the internal friction. Black feminist women, like Barbara Smith and Patricia Hill Collins, critiqued cultural nationalism heavily.
What was their criticism?
They pointed out that this reclaimed African culture was often a romanticized, patriarchal version of Africa.
The African woman archetype.
Right. The role of the woman in this worldview was often to be submissive, to support the Black king, to raise the warriors, but not to lead the revolution herself.
So replacing white patriarchy with Black patriarchy.
That's how they saw it. The feminists argued that you can't be free if half your nation is being told to stay in the kitchen and look traditional. It's a profound critique.
It is that tension, again, trying to build a new house, but using some of the old blueprints of oppression.
That is a great way to put it.
So while the intellectuals and revolutionaries are debating socialism versus culture, there's something happening on the street level that is arguably even more powerful. It's the aesthetic revolution. The Black is Beautiful movement.
This is the shift that everyone could see. It is one thing to read a pamphlet, it is another to change how you look. Black is Beautiful was a direct assault on the aesthetic standards that had ruled America for centuries.
We have to talk about hair. It seems trivial to an outsider, but in this context, hair is incredibly political.
Hair is everything. For decades, the standard of beauty was European. Straight hair, lighter skin, thin noses. If you had kinky, afro-textured hair, the societal pressure was to fix it.
The conch.
The conch. Men and women would put these harsh chemicals essentially on their scalps to straighten their hair. It burned, it left scabs, but the pain was the price of admission to respectability.
And then comes the explosion. The sources mention a specific event, the Naturally 62 fashion show.
This is such a pivotal moment. It was organized by a photographer named Kwame Brathwaite and a group called the Grandasa Models in Harlem.
Grandasa model.
These weren't professional models from an agency, they were activists. Brathwaite's slogan was, "Think black, buy black." And he put these women on stage wearing African-inspired jewelry and, most importantly, their natural hair. No lie, no hot combs, just afros.
It seemed so normal now, but at the time, this was radical.
It was shocking. Even black media outlets like Ebony magazine were pushing the straightened, processed look. Naturally, 62 was a declaration of war on those standards. It said, "My natural self is divine. I don't need to alter my biology to be beautiful."
And it caught fire.
It spread like wildfire. You see the rise of the Afro. Angela Davis, Kathleen Cleaver, Jimi Hendrix. The Afro became a symbol of rebellion. If you wore an Afro, you were signaling that you were awake, you were proud, you were part of the movement.
And inevitably, capitalism noticed.
Capitalism always notices. You see the marketplace shift. Sales of hair straighteners drop, and you get the rise of black-owned companies making products specifically for natural hair. Johnson Products, Afro Sheen. Advertisers realized that black pride was a demographic you could sell to.
But within this celebration of black beauty, there was still a battle against colorism. The sources mention paper bag parties.
This is the painful underbelly, and we can't gloss over it. Colorism is the discrimination against darker-skinned people within the black community. It's a direct hangover from slavery, where lighter-skinned enslaved people, who were often the children of the masters, were given better treatment in the house.
And the paper bag test was literal.
It was literal. In certain social circles, fraternities, sororities, or clubs, they would hold up a brown paper bag. If your skin was darker than the bag, you were denied entry. It was just brutal, internalized racism. The Black is Beautiful movement was specifically trying to smash this. It was trying to say that the dark skin, the skin most associated with Africa, the skin most vilified, was the most beautiful of all. It was the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice.
So we have the psychological reclamation in the 20s, the political demand for a nation in the 60s, the aesthetic reclamation of the body. But if you stop there, you're just a beautiful person with a gun.
Right.
You still need a history, you need a timeline. And this brings us to the intellectual battlefield of Afrocentrism.
This is the fight for the mind. Afrocentrism is the counter-narrative to Eurocentrism. For centuries, the Western Academy had taught history as the story of white people, with everyone else as a footnote or a victim.
Right, the dark continent.
Exactly. Africa was depicted as a dark continent with no history until the Europeans arrived to civilize it.
So Afrocentrism flips the board.
Completely. Malefica Tesante, one of the key scholars here, defines it as agency. It's viewing African people as the subjects of history, not the objects. It's about centering the narrative in Africa.
And the biggest flashpoint, the one that drives traditional historians crazy, is Egypt.
Kemet. That is the indigenous name for ancient Egypt. And the debate over the racial identity of the ancient Egyptians is, it's the Super Bowl of this conflict.
Okay, so lay out the argument for us.
The champion for the Afrocentric side is Cheikh Anta Diop, a brilliant Senegalese polymath. He used linguistics, anthropology, and even melanin dosage tests on mummies to argue that ancient Egypt was, unequivocally, a black African civilization. He argued that the pharaohs looked like him.
And the implication of that is massive, because if Egypt is black,
then Greece and Rome, the so-called foundations of Western civilization, learned everything they knew from black people.
wow.
Diop and others argued that Greek philosophy, mathematics, and science were essentially borrowed or stolen from the Egyptian mystery schools.
It means the West is actually a derivative of Africa.
Exactly. It reclaims the origin of civilization itself. Now, obviously, mainstream academia fought back hard. Classicists like Mary Lefkowitz wrote entire books labeling this pseudo-history.
What's their argument?
They argued that Egypt was a Mediterranean crossroads, a multicultural society, not black in the way we understand race today. They accuse Afrocentrists of therapeutic mythology.
Therapeutic mythology. That is a condescending phrase.
It is, but the Afrocentrist would counter. You invented a white mythology for 400 years to justify slavery and colonialism. We're just correcting the record.
It's a battle over who gets to write the collective text, as one source put it.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And there is also a fringe element to this that goes beyond history into biology. Melanin theory.
Okay, what is that?
This is where we get into what's called strong Afrocentrism. This is the belief that melanin, the pigment that makes skin dark, is not just a pigment. The theory claims it's a kind of superconductor that it absorbs cosmic energy.
A superconductor.
Right. Some theorists argue that high levels of melanin confer superior mental, physical, and even spiritual or paranormal abilities.
Almost like a superpower.
It is. And psychologically, think about what that does. It takes the very thing that was used to brand Black people as inferior, their dark skin, and turns it into the source of their superiority. It posits that white people, lacking melanin, are calcified, spiritually blocked, or biologically deficient.
Which brings us to the ultimate reversal. If we're talking about biological differences and rewriting origins, we have to talk about the Nation of Islam. Because their story of how the races began, well, it makes melanin theory look tame.
The NOI. This is the deep end of the pool. The Nation of Islam is a uniquely American religious movement. It blends Black nationalism, a version of Islam, and some serious science fiction elements into a powerful theology.
Founded in Detroit in 1930.
By Wallace Fard Muhammad, a mysterious silk peddler who showed up, preached for a few years, and then vanished. He is considered by the NOI to be God in person, Allah in the flesh.
That is a huge deviation from Orthodox Islam right there.
Massive. It's the first break. But the movement really grows under his disciple, Elijah Muhammad, and later Louis Farrakhan. Their central tenet is that Black people are the original people, the tribe of Shabazz. They believe Black people are divine by nature.
So if Black people are divine and God is a Black man, where do white people come from?
This is the story of Yaqub, and we need to spend a minute here because this narrative is the master key to the NOI's entire worldview.
Lay it up for us.
The story goes that 6,600 years ago, there was a Black scientist named Yaqub. He was a genius born near Mecca. He had a literal big head. His brain was massive. But he was embittered. He was a dissident. He wanted to rule, but he couldn't rule the righteous Black nation.
So he made his own people to rule.
He came up with a plan. He would create a people to rule over them using a process of grafting.
Grafting, like eugenics.
Exactly like eugenics, a selective breeding program. He was exiled to the island of Patmos, the same Patmos from the Book of Revelation. He took 59,999 followers with him, and he set up a rigid birth control law.
It sounds chilling.
It is. The doctors and nurses were instructed to kill all the dark babies and save the brown ones. Then they would breed from the brown ones, kill the darker ones, and save the red ones. Then the yellow.
So he's breeding the blackness out of them.
He is breeding the divinity out of them. After 600 years of this process, he finally achieved his goal. The white man. The Caucasian.
And what was the nature of this new creation, according to the story?
They were devils. Because they had been stripped of the Black germ of divinity, they were soulless. They were physically weak, but mentally sharp and inherently wicked. Their nature was to lie, to steal, and to divide. Yaqub released them into the world, and through trickery, Elijah Muhammad called it truly tricknology, they managed to enslave the original Black man.
I want to pause here. To an outsider, this sounds like pure sci-fi. But psychologically, what does this story do for a Black man living in Jim Crow America?
That is the crucial question. Imagine you're living in the 1930s or 50s. You are surrounded by white violence. You are told you are inferior in every way. You look at the white world and you see nothing but cruelty, lynchings, segregation, brutality. The Yaqub story offers an explanation.
It makes sense of the chaos.
It says, they aren't treating you this way because they are better than you. They are treating you this way because they are broken.
It pathologizes the oppressor.
It makes the white man's cruelty a biological defect, not a sign of power. And it tells the Black believer, you are the original. You are the God. You are just asleep, and they are the usurpers. It turns the victim into the rightful king. That is an incredibly intoxicating narrative.
And it comes with an expiration date, right?
Yes. The theology says the white man's rule was given 6,000 years, and that time is up. Which brings us to the mother plane.
The spaceship.
The spaceship. The NOI interprets Ezekiel's vision of the wheel within a wheel, not as a metaphor, but as a literal physical machine. A mothership.
So they believe there's a UFO in orbit.
They claim it was built by Black scientists on the island of Nippon, that's Japan, back in 1929.
And what are the specs on this thing?
It is 1/2 mile by 1/2 mile. It is a human-built planet. It carries 1,500 baby planes in its hull. These planes are bombers. The belief is that this ship is currently circling the Earth. They often point to UFO sightings as proof. And that the judgment will come when the mother plane destroys the white world with fire, saving only the righteous.
It is essentially the Death Star, but for justice.
It's apocalyptic technological salvation. And again, it reinforces the idea. We have the superior technology. We have the superior nature. We are just waiting for the signal.
Yet, for all this talk of spaceships and mad scientists, the Nation of Islam was incredibly practical on the ground.
That is the paradox. You had this wild out there theology, but the day-to-day practice was conservative discipline. The NOI cleaned up neighborhoods. They went into prisons and got men off heroin. They put men in suits and bow ties.
Do for self.
Do for self. They preached that a black man must protect his family, stop drinking, stop smoking, and own his own business. If you were a young man drifting in the ghetto, the NOI gave you a uniform, a purpose, a strict moral code, and a community. It gave you dignity. That appeal is powerful, regardless of the spaceships.
There was one other group we need to touch on who also rewrite biblical history, but in a different direction. The Black Hebrew Israelites.
The BHI. This is another broad movement, and we've seen them in the news lately, people like Kyrie Irving, Kanye West, but they've been around for a long time.
Now, we should clarify, not all Black Hebrews are radicals.
No, not at all. There are many congregations that simply believe Black Americans are spiritually connected to the Israelites and practice a form of Judaism peacefully. But there is a radical flank groups like the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, or ISUPK, and Israelite United in Christ, or IUIC, that are designated as hate groups by the SPLC.
What is their central claim? What separates them?
Their claim is that the people we know as African Americans aren't African at all. They are the true biological descendants of the biblical 12 tribes of Israel.
How do they explain that?
They believe that after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Israelites fled into Africa, were eventually captured, and sold into the transatlantic slave trade. They point to Deuteronomy 28.
The curses of Deuteronomy.
Right. The Bible says the Israelites would be punished for disobedience by being scattered into distant lands via ships and sold as bondmen and bondwomen. The BHI argue, who else fits that description? We came on ships, we were sold, therefore we are the Israelites.
And they have that famous chart. If you walk through Times Square or downtown Philly, you might see them with it.
The 12 tribes chart, it's a grid. It maps specific modern identities to biblical tribes. Judah is American blacks, Benjamin is West Indians, Levi is Haitians, Ephraim is Puerto Ricans, Gad is North American Indian.
So it unites all the oppressed groups of the Americas into one bloodline.
It creates a super identity. But here is the dark side. If they are the true Jews, who are the people currently living in Israel? Who are the Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews?
This is where the anti-Semitism kicks in.
Heavily. The radical BHI doctrine calls modern Jewish people imposters. They refer to them as Amalekites, Edomites, or, citing Revelation, the synagogue of Satan. They claim that white Jews stole their identity, their history, and their birthright.
It's the great replacement theory, but flipped on its head.
Exactly. And it leads to this aggressive, confrontational street preaching style. You see them screaming at passersby, condemning white people to slavery in the afterlife. It's weaponized identity politics.
But again, let's look at the why. Why is it so important to be the true Jew?
Because the Negro has no history before slavery in the American narrative. The Negro begins in chains. But the Israelite is God's chosen people. The Israelite has a covenant with the Almighty.
It gives meaning to the suffering.
Precisely. If you're an Israelite, your suffering isn't meaningless. It's a divine punishment for disobedience, which means if you return to the law, you will be restored to glory. It gives cosmic meaning to their pain.
It feels like all these movements, whether it's the New Negro, the Panthers, the Nation of Islam, or the Israelites, are trying to solve the same problem, the problem of erasure.
That is the common thread, erasure. When you have been written out of the history books or written in as a slave or a savage, you have two choices. You can try to beg the author to write you a better part, or you can grab the pen and write your own book.
And sometimes that book is a history text. Sometimes it's a political manifesto. And sometimes it's a sci-fi epic about a spaceship.
But the goal is always agency. I define myself, I define my God, I define my past.
It's a powerful, if sometimes volatile, human drive. And it makes you wonder about the nature of history itself. Well, we often treat history as this objective set of facts. But listening to this, it feels more like history is a weapon. The colonial powers use history to justify slavery. You have no culture, so we are doing you a favor. And now these movements use history or mythology as a shield and a sword to fight back.
It raises a provocative question for you, for the listener. Where's the line between reclaiming history and inventing mythology? And if the official history was a lie designed to oppress you, is creating a counter-mythology, even a...
Absolutely. Go to the sources. Read the words themselves. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It has been a journey.
See you next time.